Commander Wolffe is known among fans of Star Wars The Clone Wars for two things: being evidence that Dave Filoni is a furry, and having a missing eye. Beginning in the show's second season, Wolffe has a big gash on his face and a pale cybernetic right eye, which gives him a distinctive look. However, Wolffe didn't always have this scar. In his first appearance, in fact, he had both of his eyes. How he lost his right eye was never shown on screen, but it was a sacrifice made in one of the Wolfpack's grittiest missions, the Battle of Khorm, which we'll be discussing today. Khorm was an icy mid-rim world close to the border between Republic and Separatist space. Khorm was initially neutral, but it wouldn't be allowed to stay that way. It was one of only 3 planets in the galaxy where agrosite could be found, a valuable mineral that was extremely useful for the production of starfighters and weapons technology. Recognizing his homeworld's strategic significance, the Khormai warlord Unger Gaut seized control of the planet and made an alliance with the CIS, planning to make a killing selling Khorm's agrosite to the Confederacy. Under Gaut's rule, many Khormai were enslaved and forced to work in the planet's agrosite mines, toiling away to fulfill the Confederacy's quotas. In collaboration with Gaut, the Confederacy sent an army to Khorm, turning it into a stronghold world. Khormai resistance movements formed, but they made little progress against the CIS droid army. But the Republic wasn't going to stand for this. Not for the sake of the Khormai, mind you, but because they wanted agrosite for themselves. Less than a year into the war, they dispatched an army under Jedi Generals Plo Koon, Kit Fisto, and Tort to take the planet. The Republic force dispatched to Khorm was massive and included some of the GAR's most elite units. In orbit, the Republic had a fleet of Venator-class Star Destroyers and Acclimated-class assault ships led by Admiral Wheeler from the Star Destroyer Resilient, backed by squadrons of V-19 Torrents, BTLB Y-Wing bombers and LAAT gunships. The Republic's ground forces were drawn from several units. This included the Wolfpack, a detachment of the 104th Battalion led by Commander Wolffe, and the Devil Dogs, an elite unit from the 44th Special Operations Division led by Captain Sharp. Republic ground forces were backed by ATRT and ATTE Walkers, and the Republic's commanders were assisted by Captain Kendall Ozzel, a career officer and Nepo baby who you might know from his future as the incompetent commander of Darth Vader's flagship, the Executor. The Confederacy wasn't planning on making it easy for the Republic to take Khorm. They didn't have a fleet in orbit, but they had a weather control station on Khorm's surface that prevented ships in orbit from targeting ground installations and made air support a non-factor. On the ground, they had armies of B-1 and B-2 battle droids, backed by BX commando droids, DSD-1 dwarf spider droids, armored assault tanks, NR-N99 Persuader class droid tanks, and J-1 semi-autonomous proton cannons. Taking Khorm would be a slog. Despite the artificial storms Khorm was experiencing, Republic forces were able to establish a landing zone on the planet and deploy their ground forces. The Jedi met with the leaders of the Khormai resistance and decided to make their priority the liberation of Khormai slaves, while Ozzel and the clones went after the agrosite. Republic forces then began advancing toward the primary agrosite processing facility where Unger Gaut was located at the time. They almost immediately came under fire from Separatist artillery, however, which damaged several ATTEs. Ozzel ordered his clone troopers to disembark to protect the ATTEs, but this only exposed the clones to fire from droid infantry in the trenches surrounding the facility. It fell to the Jedi to clean up Ozzel's mess. Kit Fisto and Plo Koon took out the droids in the trenches, while Tort took out the cannons. Seeing this, Unger Gaut fled the facility for a nearby agrosite mine, which was the CIS's base of operations on the planet, where he contacted Count Dooku and requested assistance. Dooku dispatched a Sarge Ventress to help him out. Meanwhile, the Republic took the processing facility and established it as their forward operating base. From there, they planned to attack the agrosite mine and liberate the planet. Ozzel advocated for a direct assault, but the Jedi were against this, as it would result in extensive clone casualties. They believed a different approach was needed. As luck would have it, the arrival of a Sarge Ventress gave them an idea. As Ventress arrived in system, Admiral Wheeler dispatched a pair of V-19 Torrents to shoot her down before she was able to land on Khorm. They pursued Ventress into the planet's atmosphere, where they were able to witness the planet's storms open up for her. The storm closed right after she passed, destroying the two fighters, but this gave the Republic a crucial piece of information. The Confederacy had a weather control station on Khorm. If this were disabled, the Republic would be able to deploy air support for the assault on Gaut's stronghold, dramatically improving the odds. Fisto and Plo Koon took the Devil Dogs and set off to destroy the facility, leaving Tort and Ozzel behind with the Wolfpack. Once the Devil Dogs and Jedi had set off, Ventress and Gout ordered a counterattack on the Republic's new base, besieging it with tanks and spider droids. Republic forces attempted to hold the line, but Ventress was able to infiltrate the facility and destroy parts of it with explosives. She then assassinated Tort, leaving Ozzel in command of Republic forces. Ozzel, by this point, was on the verge of panic, and instead of hunkering down and defending what was left of the base, he ordered his forces to carry out a countercharge. Wolf and the Wolfpack went along with him despite their misgivings, and, at first, Ozzel's plan seemed to work, and Separatist forces began to pull back. But then spider droids buried in the snow revealed themselves and attacked the flanks of Ozzel's forces, destroying all the ATTEs and nearly wiping out the army. Ozzel surrendered to Ventress, who took him, Wolf, and 4 clones prisoner. After executing 2 of the clones, Ventress intimidated Ozzel into telling her the Jedi's plan. She then set off to lay a trap for the Jedi. Ventress and a team of commando droids attacked the Jedi and the Devil Dogs not far from the weather control station. She battled the Jedi to a draw before using the Force to cause an avalanche which buried all combatants except her and some of her droids. Around the same time, Ozzel, Wolf, and the surviving clones managed to escape captivity and steal an AAT, and Ventress, believing the Jedi to be dead, set out to kill them. But the Jedi had survived, though Plo Koon had broken his arm and many of the clones were dead. Additionally, the explosives they had planned to use to take out the weather control station were gone. Nonetheless, the Jedi decided to press on. While Ozzel and the clones returned to the Republic's original staging area, where a rear guard had been left behind, Ozzel ordered them to back up and return to orbit, hoping to stage a counterattack from space. But the storm had intensified to the point where this wasn't possible, as much of the Republic's heavy equipment had straight up frozen. As Republic forces tried to thaw out their walkers, Ventress arrived with another army, hoping to break the Republic's foothold on Khorm for good. Meanwhile, the Jedi and Devil Dogs reached the weather control station, where they devised a plan to use the station to call down a fierce storm on itself, which they hoped would destroy the station in the process. This plan worked, and the weather control station was destroyed. The storm broke immediately, allowing Admiral Wheeler to deploy air support to Ozzel's position. Ventress was forced to retreat, and Ozzel received reinforcements, allowing him and Wolf to commence an attack on the Agrosite mine, now with air support. The Jedi and Devil Dogs went ahead to scout out the facility, and they quickly realized that Gout and Ventress were planning to blow up the facility and kill all the Khormai slaves within it if it fell into Republic hands. Due to Separatist communications jammers, they were unable to relay this information to Ozzel or Wheeler, who began the attack as planned. However, Republic forces were met by a set of new weapons Gout had been working on in the mines, a set of 3 extremely powerful Agrosite cannons. These obliterated half of the attacking Republic force and shot down an acclimator, throwing the assaults into chaos. Ozzel was knocked out and command fell to Wolf, who ordered a retreat. The Jedi and the Devil Dogs, who had infiltrated the mine by this point, developed a new plan. Koon and most of the clones would free the Khormai, while Fisto and Captain Sharp blew up the cannons. Fisto ordered Wolf to carry out another frontal assault so he and Sharp could climb up the cannon's barrels when they lowered to target the clones. With time running out, Sharp sacrificed himself to blow up the cannons, while Plo Koon and his team liberated the Khormai. The blast from the cannons killed Unger Gout, and Republic forces smashed the mine's defenses and began to clear out the facility. Ventress attempted to detonate the mine as planned, but Wolf was able to catch her and destroy the detonator. He paid for this with his eye, which Ventress cut out as she fled the facility. In short order, Khorm came under Republic control and the battle was won, albeit at a high cost. As for Captain Ozzel, he woke up pretty much right as the battle ended and almost immediately made a report to Chancellor Palpatine claiming credit for everything. He was rewarded with command of a Star Destroyer, while the real heroes of the battle went unrecognized. On this channel, we spend a lot of time talking about the battles of the Clone Wars, especially the large-scale ground battles and grand naval campaigns. But sometimes, the course of a war can be altered by smaller missions, and throughout the Clone Wars, the Republic dispatched small teams of clone commandos for precisely this purpose, hoping to get an edge over the Separatists through stealth instead of through overt force. One of the most notable commando missions was the mission to Qiilura, an early war operation that could have doomed every clone in the GAR if it had failed. In this video, we'll be analysing why. Qiilura was not all that strategically important, all things considered. Located in the Mid-Rim's Qiilura sector, it was a pretty, temperate world with fertile soil and lots of life, home to a community of roughly 200,000 colonists. Most of these human farmers, though the colony was run by an Neimoidian merchant affiliated with the Trade Federation named Lik Unkit. Qiilura was the source of a lot of the galaxy's luxury foodstuffs, but because trade in the planet's crops and animal products were controlled by Unkit, most of the planet's population was mostly poor. It certainly had nothing that would make it a worthwhile target for the Republic or the Confederacy, or so it seemed. Just prior to the outbreak of the Clone Wars, during the Separatist crisis, the Jedi Council dispatched. While there, they discovered that the Separatists had taken control of the planet, employing a mercenary force commanded by the Mandalorian gun-for-hire Gez Hokan. The Confederacy had built a communications facility near the city of Teklet and a biological research facility near the capital of Imbrani, commanded by the notorious Dr. Ovalot Quail Uthan. The Jedi were able to acquire schematics for these separatist facilities, but Fulier was captured and killed by Hokan, and Tarmukan was forced to go into hiding near Imbrani. With the help of an old woman named Jinat, Tarmukan was alive on Qiilura for several weeks. Meanwhile, the Clone Wars broke out in the greater galaxy, and for a few months, the Council had more pressing concerns than their missing operatives on Qiilura. That is, they had more pressing concerns until 3 months into the war, when word got back to them that Dr. Uthan's laboratory was working on biological weapons. Specifically, Uthan had allegedly created a nanovirus that would exclusively kill clones, taking advantage of the fact that the whole GAR shared the same genome, and thus, the same very specific genetic vulnerabilities. Obviously, the Jedi couldn't allow the Separatists to get their hands on such a weapon, and they elected to deploy a special options unit to covertly destroy the facility and rescue Fulier and Tarmukan if they were still alive. Omega Squad and a unit of 4 clone commandos whose original squad mates had all been killed was chosen for the job. Pretty much right away, the mission met with complications. One of the commandos, Darman, was separated from the rest of the squad. But this quickly turned out to have a silver lining. Darman was located by Jinat, who helped him find Etain Tarmukan. Darman learned from Tarmukan that Fulier was dead, while Tarmukan learned from Darman that the galaxy was at war and that she was now a commander in the Grand Army of the Republic. Meanwhile, Jinat was able to locate the remaining members of Omega Squad, to whom she revealed that she wasn't an old woman at all. She was a Gurlanin, a member of a polymorphic species that could assume virtually any form. The Gurlanins were the indigenous sentient species of Qiilura, and they hated the colonists, who feared and hunted them. They had decided to assist the Republic, and in exchange, they wanted the Republic to remove the settlers from their planet. Jinat acted as a messenger between Darman and the rest of the squad. Due to the Separatists' communication facility, all Republic comms were jammed on and around Qiilura, which prevented the members of Omega Squad from contacting each other and the Republic fleet. But Jinat helped them overcome this obstacle, and with her help, the rest of the squad, consisting of the commandos Nina, Eitan, and Phi, were able to capture the control room of a mining facility. They took Gutane, one of Gez Hokan's lieutenants, prisoner, and interrogated him, ultimately learning little from the Weequay. The commando Nina then set out to blow up the Separatists' communications jammer, allowing the rest of Omega Squad to start communicating properly. He was successful, and following the destruction of the facility, Darman and Etain finally met up with the rest of the squad, joining forces for the final assault. They started by sending Gutane back to Hokan with false information, knowing that he'd be killed for his earlier failure. Meanwhile, they re-established contact with Republic forces in orbit and learned that the Separatists had sent battle droids to back up Gez Hokan's mercenary forces. Undeterred, Tarmukan and Omega Squad carried out an assault on the Separatist research facility, hoping to capture Dr. Uthan and blow up the facility before the bioweapons there could be deployed. With the help of the schematics Tarmukan had stolen earlier, Omega Squad were able to infiltrate the base and capture Dr. Uthan. Etain, Darman, and Atin hauled her off to a gunship sent down by the Republic ship in orbit, while Nina and Fire remained behind to blow up the facility. As they did so, Gez Hokan ordered a counterattack, dispatching his second-in-command, Captain Hurati, to rescue the Doctor. Hurati was able to wound Etain, but he was killed soon after, as were his men, and Uthan remained in Republic custody. After she was secured, Etain and Darman insisted on going back for Nina and Fire, who were still unaccounted for. Nina and Fire were able to blow up the research base, eliminating the threat of the nanovirus once and for all, but they caught the attention of Gez Hokan himself. The Mandalorian mercenary pursued the two commandos into the woods, where he was snuck up on and killed by Etain Tarmukan. With his death, Separatist forces on Qiilura fell apart. The members of Omega Squad were extracted along with the captured Dr. Uthan, while Tarmukan and Jedi General Arligan Zay stayed behind to train the locals in guerrilla warfare, hoping to drive the Separatists off Qiilura for good. In short order, the Separatists abandoned the planet, and Zay and Tarmukan stayed on Qiilura to command the militia, which they maintained in the event that the Confederacy returned. However, the Gurlanans were not happy with this. Their deal with the Republic had been that they would act as spies for the Loyalist cause, and in exchange, the Republic would immediately evict all human colonists from Qiilura, giving the Gurlanans their planet back and allowing the planet's environment to recover from the changes the colonists had forced on it. The Republic had not only broken this agreement, but the militia it had established on Qiilura made things worse, allowing the colonists to encroach on Gurlanan lands even further. Furious, the Gurlanans began spying for the Separatists, causing the Republic significant setbacks on the front lines of the Clone Wars. They were prepared to do even more damage, as they had at least 2 spies on Coruscant itself that were poised to leak intel that could change the course of the war. This quickly convinced the Senate of the wisdom of honoring their deal with the Gurlanans, and the Senate voted to expel all settlers from Qiilura, effective immediately. But the settlers didn't take kindly to this. Believing that the Republic had betrayed them, the militia Zay and Tarmukan had trained switched sides. When clone troopers were dispatched to evacuate the settlers from Qiilura, the settlers began an open war against Republic forces, causing a number of clone casualties. Etain Tarmukan, who was now a Jedi General, was put in charge of cleaning up this mess. She reluctantly gave the clones authorization to use lethal force in crushing the militia and evicting the remaining Qiiluran colonists. Before long, the eviction was complete, presumably over a fair few settler bodies. The Gurlanans had their homeworld back at long last, and it remained that way, at least until the Separatists came back much later in the war. Not every battle of the Clone Wars was as massive as the ones fought over Geonosis and Coruscant. On any given day during the conflict, 100 battles were happening at once, but most of them were fairly small in scale, fought between local factions or individual vessels. But just because these battles were small, it didn't make them inconsequential. Sometimes, small skirmishes made more of a difference than even the largest ground battles. The mission we'll be discussing today was one of those highly important small-scale battles, and it was also a thoroughly creepy one. In this video, we're going to be talking about the creepiest mission a Clone Commando squad was ever sent on, Delta Squad's investigation of the RAS prosecutor.
You lizards need to learn that I'm a lot scarier than you are.
If you've watched our 2 recent videos about Delta Squad, you're likely already familiar with this elite 4-man team of Clone Commandos. They were led by Delta 38, known as Boss, and included the sniper Delta 07 or Sev, the slicer Delta 40 or Fixer, and the demolitions expert Delta 62 or Scorch. They were the Republic's most skilled squad of commandos, having proven themselves in the first Battle of Geonosis and in many engagements since. Their skill led them to being chosen to investigate the reappearance of a missing warship in 21 BBY, 367 days after the first battle of the war. The Republic assault ship Prosecutor was one of the very first acclimated class assault ships to have seen action in the Clone Wars. It had participated in the assault on Geonosis and in many battles thereafter under the command of Captain Martz. It appeared to have been heavily modified from the stock acclimated class model since the outbreak of the Clone Wars. It had more torpedo bays and a different hangar configuration than most warships of its class, and as a result, it packed a far harder punch. This may or may not have been relevant to the vessel's fate. In 21 BBY, the Prosecutor was on patrol in the Corellian sector when it vanished without a trace. 2 weeks later, it suddenly reappeared in the Chaikin cluster near the Corbuntus system. The Chaikin cluster was a long way from Corellia and in Separatist territory. The ship didn't respond to any attempts at making contact and appeared to be adrift. The Republic feared at first that the ship had gone rogue, but there was no way of knowing this for sure without a proper investigation. This, naturally, was where Delta Squad came in. Delta Squad was familiar with the Prosecutor, as it had pretty much been their home between missions in the first months of the Clone Wars. Now, their mission was to board it and determine why it had disappeared and then reappeared in Separatist space. Each was assigned to retrieve one of the ship's 4 data cores. After being transported to the system by a small troop carrier, the 4 clone commandos split up and boarded the Prosecutor through its torpedo bays and began their explorations. Contact was lost with their strategic advisor shortly after deployment, and as far as the 4 commandos knew, they were alone on a ghost ship. Right away, the clones knew something was wrong. At first, the Prosecutor seemed totally abandoned, but it quickly became apparent that this wasn't the case. Scattered groups of clone troopers were still alive, but as the commandos watched from the ventilation shafts, the troopers were being picked off by unseen assailants. Scorch reported that some sort of strange static was interfering with his heads-up display, and soon afterwards, he dropped out of contact. Delta Squad wasn't alone aboard the Prosecutor, and their company wasn't friendly. Soon enough, Boss began experiencing visor static as well and discovered its source. It was caused by scavenger droids that were roaming the Prosecutor's maintenance corridors, using drills and energy beams to butcher clones and drag their bodies away. After fighting off several of these droids, Boss made it out of the maintenance sections and headed to the aft data core. On the way, Sev arrived at the starboard data core and began slicing into it, only to be ambushed and knocked unconscious by a Trandoshan assailant. Boss was attacked by several of these Trandoshans shortly afterwards, who he identified as being slavers. With Sev captured by the Trandoshans, Boss changed the course and retrieved the starboard data core, fighting slavers as he went. He then proceeded to the aft data core, his original assignment. On the way, he encountered a few small pockets of clone resistance. A few clone troopers were still alive and had managed to activate some of the Prosecutor's defensive turrets, which proved useful in fending off the Trandoshans. Unfortunately, this just gave the Trandoshans the idea to slice into the defense systems and use turrets against Delta Squad, causing Boss even more problems. Despite these obstacles, however, Boss made it to the aft data core, which he successfully retrieved. Miraculously, the Prosecutor's flight recorder data was intact, and it confirmed what Boss, by that point, suspected well enough. The ship had been attacked by Trandoshan slavers, though exactly why was still a mystery. As Boss went to rendezvous with Fixer, the only other member of the squad he still had contact with, it became apparent how the slavers had managed to take the ship. The slavers had elite Trandoshan warriors with them, as well as separatist battle droids. After meeting up, Boss and Fixer went to rescue their captured squad mates. They stumbled upon Sev first, who the Trandoshans were busy interrogating. The 2 commandos interrupted the interrogation and rescued their captive brother, who informed them that Scorch had also been captured and guessed that he was being held in the ship's detention block. Sev's guess ended up being right on the money, and after a quick trip to the detention level, the 3 commandos found and rescued Scorch. Scorch had managed to keep his data safe from the Trandoshans.
Yeah, they searched me, but I hid the data pretty well.
Where exactly?
You don't want to know.
By hiding it in his prison wallet.
Just like the simulation.
Meaning that Delta Squad had what they'd come for and could move on to the other objectives. From the detention level, Delta Squad headed up to the bridge where they encountered fierce droid resistance. They also discovered the Trandoshan's signal jammer, which had been responsible for their loss of contact with command. The commandos destroyed the signal jammer and restored contact with the advisor, to whom they transmitted the data they'd retrieved. After a quick analysis, the advisor at last determined what had happened to the Prosecutor. The Trandoshans had stolen the ship to sell to the Confederacy from whom they wanted to buy battle droids for their use in their slaving raids on Kashyyyk. The advisor was also able to do a quick scan of the prosecutor, informing Delta Squad that the Trandoshans had a dropship in one of the ship's hangars. The Commandos set out to eliminate it, but they were attacked by well-armed Trandoshan mercenaries along the way. The mercenaries had booby-trapped one of the ship's elevators, causing Delta Squad to end up back in the detention level, which was now crawling with Trandoshan mercs. A fierce firefight ensued, but Delta Squad was ultimately able to emerge victorious from the chaos by activating the detention level's automated lockdown systems. This flooded the whole level with poison gas, something the Commandos were able to survive due to their armor. The Trandoshans, of course, weren't so lucky. By that point, all the other clones on the Prosecutor had been killed by the mercs, and so Delta Squad was forced to attack their dropship alone. After a lengthy firefight, the Commandos were able to commandeer 2 of the Trandoshan's own rocket turrets and turn them on the dropship, blowing up the mercs' base of operations on the Prosecutor. Their victory was short-lived, however. Delta Squad had successfully cleared out the Trandoshans, but their Separatist allies had become aware of what was happening on the ghost ship. They sent a Lucrehulk class battleship to the Corbantus system, laden with hordes of battle droids. Knowing that Delta Squad alone wouldn't be able to hold off the Seps, the advisor contacted Captain Talbot of the RAS Arrester, the nearest Republic warship, and requested assistance. While Talbot changed course and headed for the Corbantus system, Delta Squad scrambled to seal off the Prosecutor's hangars so the droids couldn't deploy in force. In the next 2 hangars over, the Commandos managed to fend off the droids' first wave and seal the hangar force fields, but the droids were able to deploy fully in the 4th and final hangar before Delta Squad could arrive. From there, the droids spread throughout the ship. Nonetheless, Delta Squad was able to make it over to this final hangar and commandeer an ATTE. With it, they destroyed the droid's landing craft and sealed off the hangar, preventing the Confederacy from sending reinforcements. After this, the commander of the Separatist battleship correctly determined that it just wasn't worth the effort to take the Prosecutor, and so he decided to scuttle the ghost ship instead. With the Arrester still a few minutes away, the battleship opened fire on the Prosecutor, rapidly wearing down the ship's shields. Knowing that the Prosecutor wouldn't last long against the battleship, Delta Squad made their way to the ship's turbo laser control room. After cutting their way through hordes of battle droids, the Commandos reached the control room and began reactivating the Prosecutor's turbo laser grid. Around the same time, the Arrester finally arrived in system and opened fire on the Separatist battleship, which seemed determined to stand its ground. But as the Prosecutor's shields failed, Delta Squad was able to join the battle, reactivating the assault ship's turbo lasers and turning them on the battleship. Under fire from both the Prosecutor and the Arrester, the Lucrehulk's shields buckled and the battleship was destroyed. With their control ship out of the picture, the battle droids stationed aboard the Prosecutor shut down, and Delta Squad was victorious. For what started as such a small mission, the battle for the Prosecutor ended up having major ramifications on the Clone Wars as a whole. The data retrieved from the vessel gave the Republic detailed intelligence about the Trandoshans' alliance with the Confederacy and about the tactics employed by both parties. It also enabled the Republic to lend a hand to the Wookiees, who faced constant raids at the hands of the Trandoshans, improving relations between Kashyyyk and Coruscant. As we've discussed in the past, Kashyyyk was a vitally important world for the Republic, so Delta Squad's work aboard the Prosecutor may well have saved the Republic's war effort. So that's the story of the Delta Squad's creepiest mission, and the best mission from Star Wars Republic Commando. Lately, we've covered a whole lot of Clone Wars era Commando missions, from the well-known adventures of Delta Squad to the more secretive operations on Qiilura and Coruscant. In this video, we've got not 1 but 2 Commando operations to talk about. The first is another mission of Delta Squad's, albeit one that's much less widely known, which took place during the early stages of the Battle of Mygeeto. The second is the Battle of Gaftikar, which we briefly mentioned in an earlier video, which involved the commandos of Omega Squad. Strap in, because we're going to be doing a complete explanation of both missions. The first mission took place during the early stages of the Battle of Mygeeto, the longest conflict of the Clone Wars. Mygeeto was the intergalactic banking clan's most fortified stronghold world, and after the Republic took Munilinsk in 22 BBY, the separatist faction of the IGBC's leadership relocated to Mygeeto. Republic forces soon followed, and in 21 BBY, the Battle of Mygeeto began. The start of what would become a 2-year-long campaign. Separatist forces were heavily entrenched, committed to guarding Mygeeto's vaults, production facilities, and crystal reserves. Republic forces, which were led by the Galactic Marines, were in for a tough time breaking the siege. During the early stages of the battle, Delta Squad, the Republic's most effective clone commando team, was called in to assist the operations on Mygeeto. But they were soon distracted from their original mission by Wallon Val, the Mandalorian mercenary that had trained the Deltas and a number of other notable commando squads. Val had a special mission for Delta Squad, if a completely unauthorized one, and Delta Squad, out of loyalty to a man they looked up to as a father figure, agreed to lend him a hand. Being a banking clan world, Mygeeto was home to the savings and personal fortunes of many of the IGBC's most well-known clients, who paid for the extra protection the vaults on Mygeeto afforded their wealth. Among those who stored their wealth on Mygeeto were the Val family, whose millions of credits were stashed in the Dressian Kiolsh merchant bank. Wallon Val considered this money to be his rightful inheritance, and he enlisted the Deltas in helping him steal it from the vaults. To make it less obvious that he was responsible, and clearly for no other reason at all, Val also stole large sums of credits from a bunch of other storage boxes in the same complex, making off with 53 million credits in all. Delta Squad helped Val break into the bank and make off with the stolen cash, and when Val fell into a crevice and nearly died during their escape attempt, they summoned 2 of the Null ARCS to rescue him. When all was said and done, Val gave all the credits he had stolen from the other deposit boxes to Cal Scarada, letting him use the money in his quest to find a cure for the clones' accelerated aging. He kept the money he stole from his family for himself. Around the same time, Omega Squad was involved with a mission on Gaftikar. Gaftikar was one of many colonies on the Outer Hydian, a separatist world that had been settled millennia before the Clone Wars by human colonists. The human colonists had brought in a population of reptilian Marits, who were renowned for their skills as engineers, to build their cities, but when the work was completed, the humans had exiled the Marits into Gaftikar's forests and denied them basic rights. The humans were afraid that the Marits, who greatly outnumbered them, would rise up and take control of the planet, so they were sure to keep them brutally oppressed. The Marits, meanwhile, just wanted civil rights and proportional representation in the planetary government. Since the human colonists on Gaftikar had sided with the CIS, the Republic did something good for a change and decided to train a Marit militia to seize control of the planet. Of course, the Republic's motives weren't exactly selfless. Gaftikar was rich in Norax and Calirium, and the Republic-aligned Shenio Mining Corporation was looking to escape the regulations the government of Gaftikar had put on their extraction operations. The Republic, once again, was only interested in the locals' resources, but for once, it led them to choosing the right side. Initially, the Republic sent the ARC trooper Sull to handle operations on Gaftikar. He quickly helped the Marits raise a militia through the process of cascade training, per which Sull would train a dozen Marits, they would each go on to train a dozen more, and so on, until Sull's training had been disseminated to hundreds of thousands of fighters. In this manner, Sull quickly raised a well-trained and well-organized Marit militia, which the Republic supplied with weapons and equipment. Everything was good to go, and then Sull disappeared. The Commandos of Omega Squad, together with the Null ARC Arden, were sent to take control of the operation in Sull's absence. They found the Marit militia on standby, ready to strike whenever the orders came in from the Republic. And though Sull was nowhere to be found, the Commandos decided to proceed with the operation. Before they were due to carry out the attack, however, the Commandos did some recon in Gaftikar's capital, where they happened to run into Sull. The ARC trooper, it turned out, had deserted. One of Sull's friends and a fellow ARC trooper had deserted not long before, only to be murdered in cold blood by Republic covert ops troopers. Omega Squad was initially skeptical of this story, doubting that the Republic would murder clones just for trying to leave the army. But they were able to confirm the story when 2 covert ops troopers came to kill Sull and attacked Darman, a member of Omega Squad, by mistake. The assassins were eliminated, and the Commandos ultimately allowed Sull to go free, disturbed by what they had learned. This didn't dissuade them from participating in the Gaftikar campaign, however. Omega Squad contacted Command and let them know that the militia was ready, and the Republic dispatched the acclamated class assault ship Leveler, commanded by Captain Gilad Pelion and Jedi Master Mas Misor, to get the offensive started. The plan was that Master Misor would lead the clone troopers of the 35th Infantry and some of Pelion's starfighter squadrons in crushing the Gaftikari defense force, while the Marits took care of the rest. The plan worked pretty much flawlessly. The CIS warned the Gaftikari that Republic forces were coming, but Master Misor and the 35th Infantry easily smashed enemy ground forces regardless. Pelion dispatched starfighter squadrons to knock out Gaftikari military infrastructure, and his forces coordinated with Arden and Omega Squad, who spent the battle running around the planet and picking out communications outposts for Republic forces to bomb. The Gaftikari army received no reinforcements from the Confederacy and had only poorly trained local soldiers, a selection of laser cannon emplacements, and some speeder bikes to resist with. The Grand Army of the Republic had an easy time steamrolling them. Once the Gaftikari army was toast, the Marits moved in. They took the planetary capital, the city of Ayat, by storm, and once they had successfully occupied the city, they sent out detachments to neighboring cities, and so on until the planet was under their control. There was some resistance, but after Omega Squad was sent in to blow up Gaftikar's central holonet relay, the resistance fell apart, and the Marits had taken control of Gaftikar. All mission objectives had been achieved with minimal casualties. The Gaftikari government had been completely disarmed, the Marits were in control of the planet, and they were grateful to the Republic for its assistance. Once the fighting stopped, Republic forces pulled out of Gaftikar, leaving the planet to the Marits, who presumably got equal rights and a say in government for their troubles. Shanio Mining likely got their cut as well. But while the battle was a complete success for the Republic, it instilled a considerable amount of doubt in the Commandos of Omega Squad, who were increasingly suspicious of the Republic's motives and wouldn't soon forget their encounter with Sull and the covert ops troopers. They would eventually follow suit in deserting from the army. Recently, we've talked a lot about the less celebrated commando missions of the Clone Wars. Operations that, despite not being as flashy as the grand battles of the conflict, played essential roles in determining the course of the war. Today, we'll be discussing another such mission, the mission to Ord Cestus, which took place in 22 BBY. This mission seemed straightforward. A team of clones and Jedi were sent to stop the production of new combat droids that could have changed the course of the Clone Wars. But the operation ended up being anything but simple, and nearly everything the Jedi thought they knew at the beginning turned out to be a lie. In this video, we'll be unraveling the story of this crucial mission. Ord Cestus was a planet in the Diastan sector of the Outer Rim. Most of the planet was covered by desert or semi-desert, but despite this, the planet was home to an indigenous sentient species, the X-Ting, an insectoid species that lived as part of one planet-wide colony. During the Golden Age of the Republic, the X-Ting sold off part of their planet to the Republic, which wanted to build a prison colony on Ord Cestus. Initially, this arrangement worked just fine, but a few hundred years before the Clone Wars, the political landscape of Ord Cestus began to change. Several of the prisoners collaborated with the colony administrators to found Cestus Cybernetics, a droid manufacturing company based on the planet. The company bought up the colony and began to expand across Ord Cestus, mining the planet's natural resources for use in the production of battle droids. As they began to expand out from the land that the X-Ting had originally sold to the Republic, they unleashed the Great Plague, a pandemic that swept through the X-Ting colony and wiped out 90% of the planet's indigenous population. Following this, Cestus Cybernetics took de facto control of the planet. By the time of the Clone Wars, Ord Cestus was still technically ruled by the Hive Council, the ex-Ting government, but in practice, the Hive Council answered to Cestus Cybernetics, which in turn was controlled by the Five Families, a group of oligarchs that owned the company. There was some resistance to this state of affairs, most notably from the Desert Wing, a band of anarchist guerrilla fighters seeking to overthrow the Five Families. But for the most part, Cestus Cybernetics had complete control of Ord Cestus, which it sought to shape into a leading battle droid manufacturer. When the Clone Wars broke out, the Diastan sector seceded and joined the CIS, a move the Five Families largely supported. Nonetheless, they were still open to trade relations with the Republic and would be more accurately described as neutral. But a few months into the Clone Wars, it seemed as if that might change. Cestus Cybernetics had developed a brand new, ultra-deadly model of combat droid, the JK-13. This was an insect-like, gold-plated unit equipped with a blaster-resistant force shield and hundreds of stun tentacles. Its primary weapons, which could slice through flesh and deliver lethal electric shocks to opponents. But what made the JK-13 truly dangerous was that it wasn't a droid at all. Each unit was controlled by an immature Dashta eel, a kind of force-sensitive creature native to Ord Cestus. These eels had a limited precognitive ability which allowed the JK-13 to sense an opponent's movements before they happened. This meant that the JK-13 was an extremely tough opponent, even for Jedi. So much so that rumor held that the JK in the droid's name stood for Jedi Killer. The mere existence of these droids was a major threat to the Jedi, but then word reached Republic intelligence that Cestus Cybernetics had arranged to sell tens of thousands of JK-13s to Count Dooku. If the CIS got a hold of large numbers of JK-13s, the Jedi Council feared it could cost the Republic the Clone Wars. Thus, they dispatched Obi-Wan Kenobi, Kit Fisto, and a team of clones, including the ARC Trooper Alpha 98, to prevent the CIS from taking delivery of the droids at any cost. Plan A was to convince Cestus Cybernetics to sell the droids to the Republic instead, and failing this, Plan B was to overthrow the Five Families and bring Ord Cestus under Republic control. Kenobi was to handle the negotiations, while Fisto, Alpha 98, and the clones made contact with the Desert Wind. After arriving on Ord Cestus, Kenobi determined that the Five Families would need some added incentive to sign a contract with the Republic, so he and Fisto worked out a ruse to sway their loyalties. Kit Fisto, posing as one of Count Dooku's dark acolytes, led a team of Desert Wind militants and kidnapped the heads of 4 of the Five Families. Kenobi then rescued the oligarchs from captivity, staging a mock battle with Fisto and the militants in doing so. The ruse worked. After the rescue, the heads of the Five Families enthusiastically agreed to give the contract for the JK-13s to the Republic instead. All was going well until one of the families received evidence that the whole thing had been staged. Just like that, Plan A fell through and the Republic operatives moved on to Plan B. They worked with the Desert Wind to destroy Cestus Cybernetics facilities across the planet, hoping to cripple the Cestian economy and thus force the Five Families out of power. This plan was going well until the Desert Wind compound was located and attacked by a team of JK-13s, which incurred heavy casualties on the militants and forced them to abandon their stronghold. But the Desert Wind was undeterred by this loss. They and the Jedi contacted the Nexu, a Republic assault ship in the area, and arranged a plan to destroy Cestus Cybernetics' main factory via orbital bombardment. The Jedi planted homing beacons deep inside the factory to assist the bombardment, after which they left to meet with an ex-Ting contact of theirs to secure additional equipment for the operation. During this meeting, however, they were ambushed by Asajj Ventress. Ventress had been on Ord Cestus the whole time, helping sway the Five Families back into the Separatist camp. But this hadn't been her only mission. After the Jedi had planted targeting beacons in the Cestus Cybernetics factory, she had moved them to the heart of one of the planet's largest cities. As it turned out, the Confederacy had purchased the JK-13s in a bid to draw the Republic's attention to Ord Cestus. The droids were only a distraction meant to bait the Republic into accidentally bombing millions of civilians, something that would undoubtedly radicalize the populations of neighboring sectors, leading to a wave of secessions. Before the Jedi could relay this information to their assault ship, however, they were engaged by Ventress, who fought a lengthy battle to keep them occupied while the attack proceeded. While Ventress was keeping the Jedi occupied, however, Alpha 98, who by this point in the mission had started calling himself Jango Tat, was able to locate the Five Family's private bunker, to which the oligarchs had retreated after learning there was a Republic assault ship in orbit. Jango Tat and the leader of Desert Wind stormed the bunker, only to come face to face with a JK-13. In the ensuing battle, the militant leader ended up blowing himself up in a bid to destroy the droid. The droid survived, but when the dust cleared, it began smashing its head into a rock wall, much to Jango Tat's confusion. It was only when he examined the droid and discovered the Dashta eel inside that he recognized what had happened. The creature controlling the JK-13 had gone insane. As it turned out, the Dashta eels were peaceful creatures that couldn't stand death. The whole JK-13 project was a lie. The droids would never be suitable for battlefield use, and the Five Families had known that from the beginning. They had been trying to scam the Confederacy, hoping to amass enough wealth through their deception to be able to expand off Ord Cestus. Jango Tat recorded what he had discovered and transmitted it to the Jedi, who by this point had escaped from Ventress. Then, believing that the Five Families had to be removed for Ord Cestus to be free, he contacted the assault ship and ordered a last-minute change of targets for the orbital bombardment, calling down a strike on his position. The Five Families' bunker was vaporized, and the oligarchs were all killed. Cestus cybernetics promptly collapsed, and the X-Ting were able to regain control of their homeworld thanks to Jango Tat's sacrifice. In the end, the mission to Ord Cestus was deemed a success by Republic leadership. The whole JK-13 thing had been a ruse on two fronts. The Confederacy was just hoping to bait the Republic into committing mass murder, while Cestus cybernetics had been trying to scam both sides out of billions of credits for droids that didn't even work. The whole operation was a mess, but in the end, the people of Ord Cestus were free, and they chose to rejoin the Republic. Every army has its deserters, and the Grand Army of the Republic was no exception. Despite being programmed for absolute loyalty to the Republic, a number of the Republic's clone troopers abandoned the GAR to escape the horrors of war. Most of the deserters we usually hear about are regular clones though, like Cutler Quain, low-ranking troopers that never had all that much individual impact anyway. But there were some more high-profile deserters as well, including 2 Alpha-class ARC troopers. Considering that there were only 100 Alpha ARCs, the desertion of these 2 would have been pretty impactful, which makes their stories all the more fascinating. The creation of ARC troopers was a complicated process. They were commissioned at the suggestion of Jango Fett, who believed that a unit of more independent and creative clones would be needed for special operations. The Kaminoans agreed, but they were always very skittish about the ARCs, fearing their individuality and unpredictability. Their fears were seemingly confirmed by the first batch of ARC troopers, the Null class, who were all defective and extremely volatile. The Kaminoans almost scrapped the ARC trooper program altogether over the Nulls, but Jango was able to convince them to attempt a second batch. This batch of 100 ARC troopers was the Alpha class, and its numbers were much less volatile than the Nulls, enough that the Kaminoans were comfortable letting them exist. The Alpha class ARC troopers were much different from ordinary clones. They were more independent and they retained much more of Jango's personality, with most of the class being antisocial cynics of some variety. The Kaminoans were still skittish about them, as they were about any creation of theirs that they didn't have complete control over, but they could at least rest assured that none of the Alpha ARCs were defective. Well, except for one. Every batch of clones had a few members that were considered defective by the Kaminoans, and in the Alpha class, the aberrant clone was Alpha 02. Unlike the other ARC troopers who were successfully indoctrinated with loyalty to the Republic and its Grand Army, Alpha 02, nicknamed Spar by the clone trainers, rejected his programming entirely, remaining fully independent and lacking any loyalty to the Republic, or anyone else for that matter. The Kaminoans discovered this early on and put Spar through reconditioning. The reconditioning didn't work, but Spar was smart enough to know that the Kaminoans would kill him if they figured that out, so he pretended otherwise, and he was able to dupe the Kaminoans. Spar, together with the other Alpha ARCS, was trained rigorously by Jango Fett himself, becoming one of the most skilled soldiers in the galaxy. For many years, he was able to blend in with his fellow ARCS, and after his reconditioning, he didn't have any noticeable issues with his trainers. Indeed, he became close friends with one of the Mandalorians Fett recruited to train the clone Commandos, Mygeeto, who also worked as a doctor treating injured Commandos. This friendship ended up saving Spar's life. When he was biologically 17, Spar overheard a story about something Jango Fett had done, and he was immediately hit with an intense flashback. Not one of his own memories, but one of Jango's. He soon discovered that he had all of Jango's memories prior to his cloning. Knowing that the Kaminoans would probably terminate him if they found out, he faked a psychotic break to meet with Mygeeto and let him know what had happened. Qiilura called in a favor from Jango, who ultimately agreed to smuggle Spar off Kamino aboard the Slave One. With Fett's help, Spar escaped Kamino and became the first clone deserter. Let's put a pin in Spar's story for now. We'll get back to him soon. After Spar fled Kamino, the remaining 99 Alpha-class ARC troopers were put into stasis by the Kaminoans, who planned to keep them as a last resort weapon in case Topoka City was on the verge of being captured by the enemy. When the ARC troopers awoke, the Clone Wars had been raging for 2 months and had finally come to Kamino, and Topoka City was being overrun. The ARCs turned the tide of the battle and were soon deployed all over the galaxy, sent to the fiercest theaters of the Clone Wars. Some served as liaisons to Jedi generals on the front lines, while others were deployed on covert missions. Alpha 30, nicknamed Sull, fell into the latter category. In 21 BBY, he was sent to Gaftikar to train the planet's marginalized Marit population as an insurgent militia capable of overthrowing the planet's human-dominated separatist government. During the mission, he disappeared, and by the time the clone commandos were sent to finish the operation, he was presumed dead. But the clone commandos of Omega Squad and the Null-class ARC Arden soon discovered that Sull was indeed alive, and that he had deserted the Grand Army of the Republic. When Arden tracked him down and asked him why, Sull's answer proved shocking. To quote their conversation, "So, tell me when you first lost your enthusiasm for a long-term military career in the glorious Grand Army of the Republic." Let me see. I think it was when they blew my buddy's brains out. Yep, I do believe it was. Sull's friend, a fellow ARC named Tavo, had deserted before him, and he had been tracked down by covert ops clone troopers. He had learned the hard way that the Grand Army of the Republic had a strict policy that no clone was allowed to leave the army alive. Deserters were not arrested, as was publicly claimed, but covertly murdered. Upon learning this, Arden helped Sull escape Gaftikar and reported to his commanders that the rogue clone had been killed in action. Sull ended up falling in with Spar, his fellow ARC deserter, before Spar set off to rejoin the war effort, but on the other side. During the first few years after his desertion, Spar had worked as a bounty hunter, using what he remembered of Jango's life to become one of the best in the business. But midway through the Clone Wars, he found another calling. In the wake of Jango Fett's death on Geonosis, he had begun to believe that his purpose in life, the reason he had been given Jango's memories, was to rebuild the Mandalorian Super Commandos. To that end, he traveled to Mandalore to recruit aspirant warriors to join his cause. One of his earliest followers, Fen Shaisa, spread rumors that Spar was the son of Jango Fett, the last Mandalore of the true Mandalorians, and Spar took advantage of this rumor to claim the title of Mandalore for himself, renaming himself Mandalore the Resurrector. He and 200 initial recruits formed the Mandalorian Protectors. Initially, the Mandalorian Protectors were a small faction, one of many squabbling over Mandalorian space, but after the death of Duchess Satine and the splintering of Maul's Shadow Collective in 20 BBY, the Mandalorian Protectors became the most powerful of these factions. They seized control of most of Mandalorian space, leaving only Sundari and the former core territory of the new Mandalorians, to be squabbled over by Bo-Katan's Death Watch loyalists and the remnants of the Shadow Collective. Spar greatly expanded his forces using battle droids, and once he had a suitably large army, he joined the Clone Wars, declaring support for the CIS. For months, Spar and the Mandalorian Protectors tore the Republic a new one on battlefront after battlefront. They struck fast and hard, dishing out heavy casualties to the GAR every time. But they eventually became so effective that Darth Sidious started to see them as a threat. During the early stages of the Outer Rim sieges, Sidious lured the Mandalorian Protectors into a trap at Norval 2, where they were completely annihilated by Republic forces. Only Spar and 2 others survived. Spar was severely traumatized by the destruction of the Mandalorian Protectors. He gave up the title of Mandalore and went into self-imposed exile, despite Fen Shaisa repeatedly urging him to try rebuild. Without Spar's leadership, the Protectors fell through, and Mandalorian space fell into chaos once more. After the Clone Wars, Spar briefly joined Clan Scarada at their redoubt on Mandalore before setting off on his own once more, hiding out in the Extracarium Nebula. There, he began to succumb to clone madness brought on by his mind's inability to reconcile Spar's 2 sets of memories. By the time he was discovered by Aelin Vel, Boba Fett's daughter, Spar had completely lost his grip on reality. Vel initially thought Spar was her father, so she shot him on sight, an ignominious end for one of Mandalorian history's most important figures. The First Battle of Geonosis was the very start of the Clone Wars and the Republic's first victory in the conflict. For the Republic, it was a lifesaver, an early bit of momentum that allowed them to survive serious disadvantages in the first stage of the war. But the Republic may not have done nearly as well in the battle were it not for the effort of 4 clone commandos. The men of Delta Squad played a crucial role in the battle, and in this video we're going to be telling them. For 10 years, the Special Operations Brigade's clone commandos were raised to fight for the Republic. In that time, many of them had developed their own particular skills and preferred roles. Delta 62, or Scorch, was a gung-ho demolitions expert, a connoisseur in high explosives. Delta 07, or Sev, was an elite sniper noted for his dark sense of humor and eagerness to kill. Delta 40, or Fixer, was a no-nonsense, by-the-book slicer, skilled in the use of vibroblades. And lastly there was Delta 38, Boss, the versatile leader of the squad. They were each a piece of a whole entity, Delta Squad. In 22 BBY, Delta Squad, together with the entire Special Operations Brigade, was deployed on Geonosis in a preemptive strike against the CIS droid army. All 10,000 clone commandos saw action that day, and nearly half of them died, thanks to poor tactics on the part of the Jedi generals. Many commando squads had been deployed directly to the battlefield, a grievous misuse of resources that many Republic strategists would later take issue with the Jedi over. But Delta Squad wasn't destined for the front lines that day. They had a special assignment, the assassination of Sun Fac, the Chief Lieutenant of Geonosian Archduke Poggle the Lesser. Fac was Poggle's right-hand man, or rather right-hand Geonosian, and the Republic wanted him out of the picture as soon as possible. To minimize casualties, Delta Squad was split up for the drop on Geonosis. Boss and Scorch deployed into the Petronaki arena where the battle had begun, while Fixer and Sev deployed elsewhere along the squad's planned route. After meeting up in the war-torn arena, Boss and Scorch made their way into the Geonosian catacombs, taking down battle droids and Geonosian warriors as they went. They met up with Fixer shortly after entering enemy territory, and the 3 commandos then headed toward a nearby Geonosian command center where they believed Sun Fac to be. After clearing out a hangar of Geonosian starfighters on the way, the 3 commandos met up with Sev outside of Sun Fac's command center. The squad charged into the command center and opened fire, but Sun Fac escaped and beat a hasty retreat to a nearby hangar where his personal starfighter was waiting. Delta Squad pursued, and at length, Sev was able to take out several of the fighter's critical systems with sniper rounds, causing the ship to crash. Sun Fac died on impact, and Delta Squad's first mission was complete. But that was just the start of Delta Squad's adventures on Geonosis. After successfully throwing Geonosian leadership into chaos, the commandos were ordered to descend deeper into the catacombs where they were to infiltrate and destroy a droid factory. Another commando squad had originally been assigned to the mission, but they had been wiped out by the Geonosians, and so it was up to Delta Squad to succeed where they had failed. To get at the factory, they first had to disable a signal jammer that was preventing Republic Strategic Command from getting a good scan of the facility. To that end, Delta Squad made their way through the catacombs to the Stalgazian Hive, where they met stiff resistance from the Geonosians. Formidable Geonosian elites were mustered against them, and as they made their way through a hatchery, the squad even found themselves under attack from Geonosian larvae. Despite these obstacles, however, the Commandos were able to make their way to the signal jammer and destroy it, allowing communications with their strategic advisor to resume. From there, the Commandos made their way into the factory through the ventilation system. Once inside, they were able to locate a computer terminal with the factory schematics and send this information back to the advisor. The advisor pinpointed two key weak points that could be destroyed to bring down the factory, a pair of power conduits, which Delta Squad set about destroying. Despite a substantial droid security presence, the Commandos were able to fight their way to the power conduits and set explosives on them, causing a chain reaction that destabilized the factory. The Commandos were able to escape thanks to the timely arrival of an LAAT gunship, which wasted no time in flying them over to their next objective. In destroying the droid factory, Delta Squad dealt a serious blow to the Separatist forces fighting on the surface. By that point in the battle, Republic forces were quickly pushing toward the Separatist grounded transports, and the Confederacy needed droid reinforcements urgently. The destruction of the factory meant that they wouldn't be getting any, and the turmoil Delta Squad had caused in the Geonosian hives meant that the Geonosians were too disorganized to mount a serious opposition to the Republic on the surface as well. These developments put the Geonosians and their Separatist allies on the back foot, allowing the Republic to begin assaults on the Confederacy's landed core ships. The Republic's primary objective on Geonosis was to neutralize the transports the CIS had landed on Geonosis to pick up battle droid shipments, with the hope that it would nip the threat of the CIS droid army in the bud. By the time the Republic was actually in range of these landing zones, many of the craft had already taken off, particularly the lighter Hard Cell class and Diamond class transports. But the Federation's core ships were designed to be able to take a pounding, so they delayed their departure, opting to finish loading up their cargoes of droids before fleeing the planet. Delta Squad's final mission in Geonosis was to infiltrate one of these core ships and retrieve its launch codes, which the Republic hoped it could use to stall the ships and prevent them from taking off. The ship they had been assigned to infiltrate had already been disabled, and better yet, it was isolated from the main landing areas, giving Delta Squad a solid chance of actually getting in. But complications quickly arose on the flight over. The Commando's gunship was forced to drop them off further away from the ship than was originally planned, due to the presence of a Geonosian anti-air cannon. Delta Squad fought through the battle droids and Geonosians in the canyons on the way to the anti-aircraft gun, and despite fierce resistance, the Commandos managed to get into the fortress that housed the cannon. They sealed themselves in to prevent Geonosian reinforcements from launching a counterattack, and then, on the advice of Scorch, they planted explosives on the cannon's loading mechanisms. The bombs successfully disabled the cannon, allowing LAAT gunships to provide air support as Delta Squad moved on to their main objective. After reaching the core ship, the Commandos discovered that its main entrance was shielded and inaccessible. While a nearby secondary entrance was also shielded, it was much more exposed, and so Delta Squad opted to secure it, confident that the Republic gunships could blast it open. After the Commandos destroyed an advanced dwarf spider droid that had been deployed to guard this entrance, an LAAT swooped in and did exactly that, allowing Delta Squad to infiltrate the core ship. Once inside, the Commandos split up, each tasked with disabling one of the core ship's key systems. While Boss hit the super battle droid storage racks, Fixer took out the ship's primary power conduit, Sev targeted repulsor lift systems, and Scorch blew up a coolant intake valve. All 4 Commandos were successful in their various missions, and the core ship suffered critical damage. On one of the core ship's higher levels, Delta Squad reunited and made their way to the bridge where they were to retrieve the ship's launch codes before making their escape. By this point, ship security was well aware of their presence, and the Commandos found themselves fighting droidekas on top of standard CIS units. As the core ship fell apart around their ears, Delta Squad stormed the craft's bridge. There, Fixer got to work slicing the ship's mainframe, while Boss, Scorch and Sev held off security, which sent waves of droidicas and super battle droids to the bridge. Fixer managed to retrieve the launch codes in the nick of time, allowing Delta Squad to retreat to one of the airlocks near the back of the bridge. The Commandos escaped the doomed core ship shortly before it exploded, their last mission complete. With the core ship launch codes acquired, the Republic was able to stall the launch of several core ships, allowing SPHAT artillery to destroy them. Most of the core ships originally present on Geonosis escaped the battle, but in total, 14 were destroyed by Republic forces, in large part thanks to Delta Squad. With their missions on Geonosis complete, Delta Squad returned to the Republic assault ship Prosecutor, where they were debriefed and commended for their actions. They were one of the only Commando squads to not lose a member on Geonosis, an indicator of their effectiveness. On Geonosis, they had crippled Geonosian leadership, cut off droid reinforcements, and prevented millions of battle droids from leaving the planet, all told. The impact of all this can't be overstated, as it didn't just help the Republic win the battle, it gave them an edge in the first few months of the war. Beskar, or Mandalorian Iron, has recently become the most widely known lightsaber-resistant material brought into the popular consciousness thanks to its prominent inclusion in The Mandalorian. But Beskar was neither the first nor the only lightsaber-resistant metal in the Star Wars universe. The most widely used one, and the most well-known in-universe, was Cortosis, but a close second was Frick, which you might know as the material Magna Guard Electro staffs were made from. Naturally, Frick was an especially valuable commodity during the Clone Wars, and the Republic fought tooth and nail to keep it falling into Separatist hands. In one particular mission on Fest, the Republic dispatched one of its foremost commando teams to blow up the Confederacy's main Frick factory, a mission we'll be discussing today. Unlike Beskar and Cortosis, Frick wasn't a natural compound. Rather, it was an alloy and it required an extensive refining process to produce. But the cost was worth it. Typically made of Frickite and Tadirium, Frick alloy was one of the most durable metals in the galaxy. Not only was it completely lightsaber resistant, but it was so tough that a Frick container on Alderaan was allegedly able to survive the planet's destruction at the hands of the Death Star. Frick wasn't alone in its toughness, of course, but being an alloy made it uniquely useful. There were a variety of recipes that could produce Frick, and while none of the ingredients used in making the metal were terribly common, they were easier to find than nodes of Beskar or Cortosis, both of which were infamously rare. Beskar was only found on Mandalore and its moon, Concordia, and the secrets of how to refine it were known only to the Mandalorians, making it unusable for outsiders even if they got their hands on it. Cortosis, meanwhile, was even better at stopping lightsabers than either Frick or Beskar, since, in its purest form, Cortosis caused lightsabers to short-circuit and shut down. However, Cortosis was tremendously difficult to mine, since the metal was completely energy resistant, requiring the use of hydraulic jacks that rapidly wore out and filled the air with tiny Cortosis particles, which clogged the lungs of miners and caused painful, premature deaths. Frick was a much more convenient alternative to both metals. Naturally, any galactic power could find a use for Frick, and Frick refineries were hotly contested during the Clone Wars, especially as they were the main ingredient of electrostaffs used by General Grievous's Magna Guards. The Confederacy's main Frick refinery was located on the planet Fest in the Atravis sector, an icy but thoroughly industrialized world. Most of Fest was covered by snow, urban sprawl, or both, and it had the necessary infrastructure and ore loads to host a Frick factory. But Fest was also fairly well known, so it didn't take long for Republic agents to discover the Frick factory there. Once Republic Command was aware of the factory's existence, it was inevitable that they would try to take it out. 10 months into the Clone Wars, in early 21 BBY, Omega Squad, one of the Republic's most elite clone commando squads, was assigned to blow up the factory. This squad was unique in that all of its members had been the sole survivors of their original commando squads. Some were the sole survivors of multiple, in fact. They had proven to be a highly effective team in an early mission to Qiilura, however, and they were quickly identified as second only to Delta Squad when it came to getting the job done well. They were given unique equipment by Republic Command. Each member of Omega Squad was given a set of jet black, energy-absorbing Catan class armor meant for stealth. They found it particularly ironic that they were given this new gear right before a mission to Fest, which was covered in snow from pole to pole. The Commandos were deployed to Fest in an LAAT gunship, which dropped them off on an outcrop overlooking the factory. The facility was located high in Fest's mountains, away from the bulk of the planet's industrial sprawl. This meant that it was isolated from separatist forces elsewhere on the planet, but it also meant it would be harder to infiltrate, especially since the factory was heavily guarded, with nearly a full army of B-1 battle droids patrolling the area. After scouting out the area, Omega Squad determined a plan of attack. Phi, one of the Commandos, opened fire on the droids outside the factory using a missile launcher, drawing away their fire while two of his squadmates, Darman and Aiton, climbed to higher ground to sneak past the droids. Phi's diversion allowed Darman and Aiton to successfully infiltrate the factory, and once they were inside, they made an entrance for Phi and the squad leader, Nina. Once the droids were finished off, the other members of Omega Squad made it into the factory, where they could get to work blowing the place to hell. The rest of the mission played out pretty simply. Nina, Phi, Darman, and Aiton made their way around the factory, evading the guards and infiltrating the processing plant and the foundry. They laid explosive charges in both rooms and then got the hell out of the factory, all without attracting any attention. Once they were clear of the facility, they detonated the charges, leveling the whole facility and crippling the Confederacy's Frick manufacturing capabilities. Once all was said and done, Omega Squad was evacuated from Fest, having completed yet another mission with 0 casualties. It's unknown if Fest was the Confederacy's only Frick factory or just its main one. Nonetheless, the CIS was able to get its hands on enough Frick to arm Grievous's Magna Guards. But the mission to Fest was nonetheless considered a major victory by Republic Command, and it led to Omega Squad being assigned some of the most delicate missions of the Clone Wars in the years to come. Fest initially remained a separatist world, but during the Outer Rim sieges, the Atreus sector came under attack from Republic forces, and Fest was eventually conquered. Not long after, the Republic became the Galactic Empire, and Fest's factories were claimed by the Imperial military. The Empire also rebuilt the planet's Frick refineries, undoing Omega Squad's hard work. The Empire had many uses for Frick, but the facilities on Fest were eventually commandeered for one of its most secretive weapons engineering programs, the fabled Dark Trooper project. The project began when then-Lieutenant Rom Mock proposed that those clone veterans of the Clone Wars that remained in Imperial service, whose accelerated aging was quickly rendering them unable to fight, should be upgraded with cybernetics to allow them to serve the Empire for longer. This reconstruction saw up to 70% of the clone veterans' original bodies replaced with Frick-laden cybernetics manufactured on Fest, resulting in the Phase 0 Dark Trooper. The success of this initiative saw Rom Mock rapidly climb through the ranks of the Empire, eventually becoming a general. But the Phase 0 Dark Troopers wound up being mentally unstable, and many committed suicide due to the trauma of being more machine than man. But this was only the start of the Dark Trooper project. Mock's next proposal was for a line of battle droids that would be designed with the lessons learned from the Phase 0 Dark Troopers. This resulted in the Phase 1, Phase 2, and eventually Phase 3 Dark Troopers, each of which were highly advanced battle droids. All of these droids were made with Frick components. All Dark Trooper models were built with Frick skeletons. Additionally, the Phase 1s carried Frick blades and handheld shields, while the Phase 2s and Phase 3s had Frick-laden battle armor, which made them incredibly difficult to destroy. In 0 ABY, the Dark Trooper project led a second mission to Fest, similar to that undertaken by Omega Squad, this time carried out by Kyle Katarn on behalf of the Rebel Alliance. Katarn carried out his infiltration of the Imperial Frick factory virtually the same way Omega Squad did, cutting down roughly 100 Imperial personnel in the process. Katarn didn't blow up the Fest facility, but he was able to access its databanks to get crucial information about the Dark Trooper project, which eventually led to the project's destruction. In a war with as much political and ideological tension as the Clone Wars, it's no surprise that some missions were nastier than the others. Some missions seemed straightforward at first glance, only to take a turn for the worse at some point, either due to poor intel, fun enemy surprises, and betrayal. The mission we'll be looking at today was lucky enough to have all three, making it a contender for the mission most likely to fail award. Yet, despite all odds, it was a success, all thanks to the cool head and nerves of steel of one particular clone. In today's video, we'll be talking about the mission to Osnek, and how Sergeant Banks was an absolute hero. The year was 22 BBY and the Clone Wars had just broken out. With hostilities breaking out across the galaxy, the Republic was fighting on multiple fronts while simultaneously sending out smaller units of clones to carry out more discreet missions, like espionage, reconnaissance, and sabotage. The mission we'll be talking about today falls in the latter category, when an intrepid band of clones, led by CT-7719, named Banks, was sent to the planet Osnek. Osnek itself was located on the Kadamimu sector in the Outer Rim, a sector known for its high militarization, especially its capital world, Kadamimu 5. Controlling Osnek was key to controlling the sector, and Sergeant Banks and his squad were sent there with the purpose of destroying a droid command center. Commander Greeb's Kishporg was the officer behind the mission, and he tasked Sergeant Banks with leading his squad into the fray. Banks had gotten his name from his ability to calculate mathematical angles in his head, which allowed him to fire shots, banking them off other surfaces and ricocheting them to his original target, somewhat like what we see Crosshair do in the Bad Batch. The rest of his squad was composed of their clone pilot, Crazy Legs, and clone troopers Ghost, Psych, Cutter, and several other unidentified troopers whose fate you can probably already guess. Banks and his homies were transported towards their drop-off point in an LAAT. During the short ride, his team members gave him a hard time for being fresh out of training, a shiny, as they called clones with nothing but simulation experience. The mood was already soured as Ghost and Psych's questioning peeved Banks, but Banks' day got even worse when they were shot out of the sky. The area was allegedly occupied by separatist forces, but what had shot them down was nothing short of a large droid army. Despite Crazy Legs' best attempts, they crashed badly into Osnek's forest, killing the first batch of those unidentified troopers. Psych was the first one to make it out of the wreckage, and what he came face to face with was hundreds of B1 and B2 battle droids. The clones had no choice but to try their best to fend the droids off while protecting their wounded and trying to make an escape. Only 7 clones got out of that LAAT alive, and thanks to Banks using a thermal detonator, they were able to retreat into the jungle. After making camp in order to rest and treat the wounded, Psych tried to repair a communications array and get in touch with the GAR, but he was initially unsuccessful. Several tries later, he managed to get a signal through and connected them with Commander Kishporg, who appeared via holo projection. Intel was that the droid command center was 20 kilometers away, and the squad had 18 hours to make the trek, survey the facility, and possibly sabotage it if they were able to. But Kishporg wasn't done. He ordered the rest of the squad out so he could speak to Banks alone, ostensibly to check in on him and his experience so far. Banks was, after all, a shiny, and Kishporg was concerned about how he was handling his subordinates' hazing. He reminded Banks to stay strong, unprejudiced, and to focus on completing the mission to the letter. The mission was off the books, officially, so it was of the utmost importance that they be stealthy. Right before daybreak, Banks and 5 other clones ventured out of their camp toward their target, leaving behind Crazy Legs, whose leg had been shattered in the crash, so he would have slowed them down too much. The jungle wasn't kind to them. If it wasn't the rough terrain, it was the murderous fauna which took out another unnamed clone by gobbling him up. Psych tried to keep morale up by sharing stories, but Ghost was unwilling to participate. Banks and Psych also discussed clone armor, which Psych believed to be something no clone should ever have replaced. But they hadn't run out of problems. Cutter, the clone on point, soon spotted an ancient ruined city up ahead, which none of their scanners had picked up. No sooner had they realized they were right next to civilization than they were surrounded and taken prisoners by Toma, the local sentient species. Tied up, Banks tried to lie their way out of it by saying they were on a humanitarian mission, but when the natives pointed out the clones were carrying explosives, not food and medicine, the jig was up. The Toma patrol leader ordered them to be executed. But remember the large droid army from earlier? Well, Banks and his squad were certainly reminded of them when they swarmed their position. He urged the Toma leader to let them go so they could fight, which he did. Mid-fight, however, Cutter urged Banks to take Ghost and Psyche and leave to complete the mission, since they were running out of time. Banks was unwilling to leave Cutter and the two other unnamed clones behind, but Cutter reminded him it was a stealth mission, and even if they beat the droids back, the Toma were a whole lot of witnesses to leave behind. We don't think we have to explain that implication. Nevertheless, Banks took the suggestion to heart and left with Ghost and Psyche off to complete his first ever mission. Or so he thought. Together, the three clones covered the remaining distance toward the facility Kishpog had marked on their maps. Two Toma guards were stationed at the entrance, whom Ghost picked off with his sniper rifle without raising the alarm. The three snuck inside and began working their way through the facility with little resistance, which Banks later admitted should have raised his suspicion. The sergeant ordered his team of two to split up and look for separatist technology, and it was Psyche who first noticed something was very wrong. The facility was nothing like what had been described to them. And then, Ghost shot him in the back. This is where Banks realized he'd been set up from the get-go. While the sergeant stood there, stunned, Ghost began going around planting bombs. Ghost explained that Psyche had to die because he wasn't aware of their real objective, which had to remain secret at all cost. According to him, the facility was a power plant and the mission was to destroy it. This would outrage the native Toma, who would see this as an attack from the Republic and join the Clone Wars on the side of the CIS. Banks tried to argue their goal should be to stop conflict, not start it, but Ghost turned and tried to shoot him too. Banks dodged the bolt and tried to fire back, but Ghost had already left his LOS. He demanded to know why Ghost would betray them all, the Republic and his clone brothers, but Ghost explained that he had just seen the light and didn't want to spend his life fighting a stupid war for the Republic only to be sent to die somewhere. Determined to prevent the destruction of the power plant, Banks snuck up on the traitor, but Ghost was ready for him. He chucked a grenade in his face, which knocked him down, battered and bruised. Banks hadn't had the time to recover before Ghost was on him, straddling the prone clone and pulling out a garrote to choke him. But Banks wasn't just going to lie there and take it. He managed to draw his blaster and, aiming off to the side, lived up to his name by ricocheting the bolt off the room's metal turbines and into the back of Ghost's head, killing him. Despite his injuries, Sergeant Banks managed to deactivate the bombs, steal Ghost's helmet, and escape before the native guards caught up to him. Disguised as Ghost, Banks contacted Kishpog and reported mission success, which pleased the traitorous commander. Kishpog had him collected, but the moment the two were on board, he realized Banks was not who he claimed to be and held him at blaster point. When Banks revealed his identity, he demanded to know why the commander and Ghost had betrayed the Republic. Kishpog, furious, fired back that he didn't want to take part in a galactic war and Ghost just wanted to survive. Banks demanded he stand down, and when the commander refused, he threw his helmet at him, disarming him and then tackling him to the ground. Their shuttle crash landed since Kishpog had accidentally killed the pilot droid when he was disarmed, but after the crash, Banks contacted the Republic, caught them up on the situation, and had himself and Kishpog collected. The commander was arrested, but infuriatingly enough, so was Banks. The sergeant was made to stand through a military tribunal that was investigating his involvement in the incident. But after the investigation was concluded, Banks was exonerated and allowed to go free back to the rank and file of the GAR. One of the most famous battles of the Clone Wars was the Battle of Coruscant, the dramatic climax of the largest conflict in galactic history. The battle is noteworthy not just because of its scale or what actually happened during it, but also for its setting alone. Coruscant, the capital of the galaxy, a planet that hadn't seen a war for over 1,000 years. Except that last bit wasn't true. Not exactly. Even before the Battle of Coruscant itself, the galactic capital wasn't spared from the chaos of the Clone Wars. It was the site of intrigue, assassinations, and sabotage missions, and part of it was very briefly attacked by the CIS directly early in the conflict. But one of the most impactful skirmishes on Coruscant was a commando mission in 21 BBY aimed at rooting out a terrorist cell. As the capital of the Galactic Republic, you would be excused for thinking that Coruscant was a loyalist world through and through. But that wasn't entirely true. The people who controlled Coruscant, the wealthy denizens of the upper city, were pretty firmly loyalist, but the people who lived in Coruscant's depths weren't. Most of Coruscant's population lived below the surface of Galactic City, spread across thousands of levels that never saw the light of day, and never saw proper political representation either. These districts ranged from thousands of anonymous, interchangeable middle-class districts to the vast slums of the Undercity. And the people who lived there weren't so firm in their loyalty to the Republic any more than the Republic was firm in its loyalty to them. The Republic and Coruscant's planetary government near exclusively represented the people who lived in the planet's upper districts. Those in lower districts were pretty much left to their own devices until they caused problems for the people on the surface, at which point the Coruscant security force would come down and brutalize people until the problems stopped. As you might expect, this didn't exactly inspire loyalty in the people of the lower levels. Most were indifferent to the fate of the Republic, but some were radicalized by their treatment and aligned themselves with the Separatists. Thus, despite being the capital of the Republic, Coruscant had a sizable population of Separatists, and though most of them were forced to keep their beliefs under wraps, there were more Separatists on Coruscant than there were on entire Separatist planets. Fortunately for the Republic, these Separatists were scattered all across Galactic City. Many kept their beliefs private for the entire length of the war, but some were determined to act. During the early stages of the Separatist crisis, some of these beings had carried out terrorist bombings on Coruscant's surface. Many of these terrorists were caught and/or killed, but there were always more to take their place. This number only grew as the Clone Wars went on and began to transform Coruscant. After the Battle of Geonosis, the Republic leveled entire neighborhoods to make way for military bases and staging grounds, rendering thousands of Coruscanti homeless. Protests against these changes were met with intensely violent crackdowns carried out by the newly formed Coruscant Guard. Thus, as the war continued and these abuses began to pile up, organized separatist terrorist cells formed on Coruscant. Most of these were small and independent, but some were in contact with the CIS and quite well organized. In 21 BBY, one of the more organized cells orchestrated the bombing of Depot Bravo 5, a GAR military base. 15 clone troopers were killed, a lot of equipment was lost, and the base suffered extensive damage. In response to the incident, Republic authorities called for a crackdown on the Coruscanti separatists, and a joint anti-terrorism task force was formed. The Coruscant Security Force teamed up with the Republic Special Operations Brigade to investigate and bring down the cell responsible for the bombing. The Delta Squad, Omega Squad, and several of the Null-class ARC troopers participated, as did the Mandalorian Commando trainers Kal Skirata and Wallon Val, and the Jedi Padawan Etan Tarmukan. Within a short while, the task force had determined the identities of several terrorists affiliated with the group. By watching them, they discovered a traitor in GAR logistics that had been slipping the terrorists' explosives for use in their attacks. This traitor, Vina Jis, was interrogated and then killed. The team deduced that there were more leaks in GAR logistics, but more investigation into the matter was necessary. In the meantime, they started up a fake arms dealing business in the Coruscant underworld, hoping to bait the terrorists into purchasing weapons tagged with tracking devices. The terrorists took the bait. Thanks to this, the task force was able to identify the leader of the terrorist cell, a being named Perive. Not long after this breakthrough, the additional moles in GAR logistics were found and eliminated thanks to Jinnart, the Gurlanen you might remember from our video about Qiilura. Jinnart had been posing as Vina Jis, it turned out, and she had infiltrated the GAR in protest over their handling of local politics on Qiilura, as we mentioned in that video. Nonetheless, she decided to help Republic forces out, and they granted her some concessions. After this, Cal Skirata, the leader of the Republic's Spec Ops side of the task force, determined that the team had enough intel to execute its crackdown. He arranged a meetup with Pariva to sell him some explosives for the next attack, and the terrorists agreed. But the CSF caused problems for the Sting when they arrested one of the terrorists before the proposed meeting, which caused the cell to panic. Pariva moved the meeting up by 24 hours and changed his mind about showing up in person. Nonetheless, Skirata made the call to go ahead with the operation anyway. Wallen Val and Etain Tarmukan were sent to assassinate Pariva while the Commandos sought the meetup. Everything went to plan. Pariva was killed, and Delta and Omega squads attacked during Skirata's fake arms deal, killing 26 of the terrorists in a shootout. Republic forces didn't suffer any casualties. Following this, the CSF made their own move, arresting 90 additional terrorists that they had linked to Pariva and his men. This crackdown shattered Pariva's network, preventing them from carrying out any further bombings. The mission was deemed a success, and Skirata and his men celebrated by throwing a rave the following night. The Republic Holonet News touted this sting as a major victory, a serious blow to separatist cells on Coruscant. But this wasn't the end of separatist activity on Coruscant, nor the end of terrorist attacks on the galactic capital. As the Clone Wars went on, terrorist activity continued. Former Supreme Chancellor Valorum and thousands of others were killed in the bombing of a passenger liner just a year later. As a result of the continuing attacks, the Republic began to clamp down on the Coruscant underworld. A Security Act passed in 21 BBY gave the Coruscant Guard and Republic intelligence a blank check to violate the civil rights of loyalist citizens, and harsh crackdowns were imposed on the underworld, which was subjected to curfews and Republic military patrols. Further security acts were passed as the war went on, taking away additional civil rights and turning formerly lively parts of the underworld into ghost towns for fear of the Coruscant Guard. The Republic began carrying out random, warrantless searches of houses in the underworld, making arrests based on the slightest suspicion and harassing anyone that showed the slightest hint of disloyalty. Non-humans were targeted disproportionately, and entire species were deemed separatist and deported from Coruscant altogether. Not even the inhabitants of the upper city were spared. Coruscant Guard checkpoints sprung up all over the place, and even senators were occasionally pressed for identification by shock troopers. The reign of the Empire began early on Coruscant, and by the time the Clone Wars were over, the planet was already a police state. The kicker is that this draconian nonsense did nothing to stop the rise of separatism on Coruscant. Quite the contrary, it radicalized even more people. Thus, when the Battle of Coruscant happened and the CIS deployed droid armies onto Coruscant's surface, the planet's defenders had to fight a war on two fronts. Grievous's battle droids were joined by ad hoc armies of separatists in the underworld who rose up against the Coruscant Guard when the planet came under attack. They were crushed, of course, and it was this, not all the repression, that meant the end of the Coruscanti separatists. The Battle of Kashyyyk was one of the largest and most important battles of the Clone Wars, fought over the homeworld of the Wookiees. It commanded the attention of military figures as important as Yoda and General Grievous, and it would have had the potential to change the course of the entire war if it wasn't right at the end of it. But despite the extreme importance and eventual scale of this battle, it started off pretty small. Just 4 clone commandos kicked off the Battle of Kashyyyk, and in this video, we're going to be telling the story of how. Let's start by introducing our heroes, the commandos of Delta Squad. The team was led by Delta 38, nicknamed Boss, and included the demolitions expert Delta 62, the slicer Delta 40, and the sniper Delta 07, nicknamed Scorch, Fixer, and Sev respectively. These guys were the best of the best, some of the top clones of the Republic Special Operations Brigade, having served from Geonosis up until the war's final year without a single casualty. They were who the Republic called in for truly important commando missions. In one such mission, a year into the Clone Wars, Delta Squad discovered that the Trandoshans, the Wookiees' planetary neighbors, had made an alliance with the Confederacy of Independent Systems. This revelation was a part of what led Kashyyyk to formally declare support for the Republic, and it also led to greater Republic scrutiny of Trandoshan activities. As a result, in 19 BBY, as the Outer Rim sieges kicked into high gear, Republic intelligence discovered that Trandoshan slavers had begun moving against the Wookiees in Kashyyyk's jungles. The slavers had become bolder than they'd been in centuries, coming close to the Wookiee city of Kachiro and daring to kidnap a powerful Wookiee chieftain, Tarful. The Republic feared there was more to this than it seemed and suspected separatist involvement. Thus, Delta Squad was dispatched to investigate. Delta Squad was tasked with infiltrating the camp where Tarful was being held and freeing the Wookiee leader. They landed on the forest floor near Kachiro, where the Shadowlands weren't nearly as dangerous as they were elsewhere on the planet, and infiltrated the camp without much difficulty. But as the Commandos fought their way through Trandoshan mercs and slavers, their advisor in orbit detected an unidentified craft coming in for a landing at the slaver base. Boss was able to get a visual on the craft, and the advisor recognized the ship immediately. It was the Soulless One, General Grievous's ship. Now certain the Trandoshan's operations were far more than just their usual slaver hijinks, the Commandos fought their way to the camp's detention center and rescued Tarful and a few other Wookiees. But they weren't allowed to leave the slaver base just yet, as their advisor wanted them to scope out the pad where the Soulless One had landed. The Commandos complied, and they got visual confirmation that it was indeed General Grievous who was paying the Trandoshans a visit. Delta Squad raced down to the landing pad, but they were unable to stop the CIS Supreme Commander from taking off again. At length, they defeated the Magna Guards Grievous had left them as a parting gift, with difficulty, and managed to get Tarful out of the base. But this wasn't the end of their mission. The revelation that Grievous was involved with the Trandoshans opened up a whole new can of worms, and Delta Squad was about to dive right in. Boss and the gang moved on to another Trandoshan compound nearby, one that was considerably larger. Once they got inside the compound, however, it became clear that the base was more than it appeared to be. After breaching the perimeter, Delta Squad encountered battle droids guarding the compound, and Fixer and Scorch noted that the whole base seemed to be full of separatist supply crates. As the Commandos started to encounter droidicas, spider droids, and other elite separatist units, they concluded that this wasn't a slaver base at all. It was a full-blown separatist staging area. Delta Squad blew up the base's supply caches and landing pads to neutralize it for the time being, but by that point, it had become apparent that the Confederacy was planning a full-blown invasion of Kashyyyk. After the supply base was neutralized, a gunship picked up the Commandos and shuttled them off to Kachiro, where the real battle was about to begin. As Delta Squad touched down in the city of Kachiro, the Confederacy had already begun landing an invasion force on the far side of the city. In a surprise attack, several warships had slipped past Wookiee defenses and deployed right before Kachiro could muster up an effective counter. By the time the Wookiees were able to rally, half of Kachiro had fallen to the droids and Trandoshan raiders were pouring into the other half. The Wookiees were spread thin, but there was still hope to push the Confederacy back. The two halves of Kachiro were linked by a single bridge, and if that bridge were to be severed, it would be enough to stop the separatist advance, at least for a time. Delta Squad was sent out to do the job. Delta Squad cut through the Wookiees' side of Kachiro, battling Trandoshans as they went and easing up the pressure on the city's defenders. Quick thinking on the part of Boss Scorch 7 Fixer sealed up the several breaches in Kachiro's defenses that the Trandoshans were using as entrances. By the time Delta Squad reached the center span, their Wookiee allies were well on their way to securing their side of the city. When the Commandos arrived at the bridge, the droid army was in the middle of paving the way for a bigger assault force, and the Commandos had to fight through swarms of battle droids to secure the bridge. Their problems multiplied when the charge they planted on the bridge misfired, forcing them to find a rocket launcher and do things the old-fashioned way. Despite these hiccups, however, Delta Squad successfully destroyed the bridge. The Separatist and Wookiee sides of Kachiro had been cut off from each other, and our brave Commandos were on the Separatist side. But they weren't alone. Tarful and a number of Wookiees had been cut off from the Separatist side of Kachiro as well, and now Delta Squad was tasked with helping them mount an effective resistance. Using maintenance tunnels to get around the droids' major staging areas, Delta Squad managed to find Tarful and several of his Wookiees, and together they began to take back the far side of Kachiro. As Wookiee resistance fighters joined them at every turn, the Commandos made for a pair of munitions dumps where the Wookiees hoped to arm up. The droids planted charges on the munitions crates, but Delta Squad arrived in time to disarm the bombs and save the ammo. As the Commandos fought across Kachiro, they encountered even more of the Confederacy's elite units. Advanced spider droids, droidicas and magna guards were all deployed to stop the Wookiees' advance, and the Seps even deployed Geonosian elites to stop Delta Squad from saving the munitions base. As Sev noted, this was a lot more than the Confederacy would deploy for a smaller operation, an indication that they were serious about taking Kashyyyk. Despite this fierce resistance, Delta Squad managed to link Tarful up with the rest of his Wookiee warriors and arm the lot of them, allowing the fearsome chieftain to advance the reconquest of Kachiro. As Tarful got set up in Kachiro's war room, Delta Squad pushed higher into the city, climbing up through the Roshir tree that contained the Seps' staging area. A Commerce Guild destroyer was docked at the top of this tree, and if Kachiro was to be retaken, it had to be destroyed. That part of the city had defensive turrets capable of doing the job, but they were inoperable at the time as the destroyer had hooked up into Kachiro's power grid and prevented the turrets from coming online. Tarful informed Delta Squad that there were backup generators which could provide power to the turrets, however. The Commandos advanced up through the tree, clearing out hangars and Roshir nurseries alike and meeting heavy resistance the whole way up. Delta Squad was able to power up 2 backup generators, allowing Kachiro's defensive grid to come online. All that was needed was a team to actually man those turrets, and naturally, Delta Squad was chosen for the job. The clone Commandos had to fight through so many droids on the way up that Sev ended up losing count of his kills, a first in his 3 years of frontline service. After battling a full army's worth of battle droids, Trandoshans and Geonosians, Delta Squad finally made it up to the highest levels of Kachiro, where members of the squad started peeling off. Sev was tasked with manning the first turret the Commandos encountered, while Fixer took the second, Scorch took the third, and Boss took the fourth and last. With the Separatist destroyer in range, the Commandos opened fire, pummeling the warship with rockets. The ship's shields buckled, and after a sustained bombardment, its skeletal frame gave way. The destroyer exploded, blunting the Confederacy's assault on Kashyyyk and allowing the Wookiees to liberate Kachiro. Delta Squad had finally completed their mission. There was no time for celebration, however. Even as the smoke from the destroyer's destruction cleared, Sev was ambushed by multiple hostiles, and his comm signal was lost. Fixer and Scorch regrouped with Boss and prepared to go after their missing brother, only for Command to order them to evacuate from Kachiro immediately. Reluctantly, the Commandos were forced to abandon their brother. It was only as a gunship carried them away from Kachiro that Delta Squad learned why they had been recalled. The Confederacy wasn't ready to abandon its assault on Kashyyyk quite yet, and the fight was about to be joined. As the Commandos learned, their mission itself had been cover for a full-scale Republic invasion of Kashyyyk. As Delta Squad's gunship took them above the tree line, dozens of Republic assault ships descended on Kashyyyk, disgorging landing craft and swarms of starfighters. As the stunned Commandos watched the invasion unfold, Grandmaster Yoda sent out a message to all incoming Republic forces, ordering them to head to Kachiro and rendezvous with Delta Squad. The Battle of Kashyyyk had begun. ARC troopers were decidedly badass, and on the battlefields of the Clone Wars, they displayed incredible skill and competence again and again. There are many amazing stories of ARC troopers in action, but one of the most awe-inspiring is that of the Battle of Hypori. ARC troopers weren't all that heavily involved in this battle, at least in the early stages of it, but the Mutilants 10's last-minute intervention in the final hours of the battle is the stuff of legends, perhaps the ARC troopers' finest hour. That day, the troopers of the Mutilants 10 became the first clones to come face to face with General Grievous and escape with their lives. And in this video, we'll be telling the story of that harrowing mission. After the Battle of Geonosis, the CIS had lost their primary droid factory, hindering their ability to capitalize on the Republic's disorganization during the first weeks of the Clone Wars. But this loss was quickly overcome as dozens of new mech worlds were established or reconfigured to fill the void left by Geonosis. The most important of these mech worlds was Hypori, a Geonosian colony in the Ferra sector. This increased importance, however, made Hypori a target, one that Republic forces attacked just 4 months into the war. The Republic mustered a pretty huge invasion force to take Hypori, composed of numerous acclimated class assault ships crammed full of clone troopers and armored vehicles. The force was led by 7 Jedi, Dakman Barek, Kyadimundi, Shakti, Kakruk, Aayla Secura, Tarsier, and Padawan Giorgi. It was, according to Republic intelligence, more than sufficient to take Hypori, and it was being dispatched at a point in the war where the Republic had the advantage. Republic forces had just won major victories on Mon Cala and Munilinst, and Hypori seemed to be next on their list. Unfortunately for Republic forces, however, the Confederacy had secretly dispatched General Grievous to take command of Hypori's defensive garrison. Grievous ordered orbital mines to be deployed at the exits to major hyperspace lanes leading to Hypori, and when the Republic invasion force came out of hyperspace, it plowed right into them. The entire fleet was crippled immediately, and the wrecks of the Republic assault ships plummeted toward Hypori's surface. A few were intact enough to allow the clones and Jedi aboard to make it safely to the surface, including the Jedi's command ship. But these groups of survivors were soon swarmed by hordes of battle droids. The 7 Jedi survived the crash landing and attempted to rally their forces, but they were outmaneuvered at every turn by General Grievous, who led his own army in a total rout of the Republic invasion force. Master Barak was just barely able to get a distress call to Obi-Wan Kenobi on Munilinst before Grievous cut him down. The rest of the clones on Hypori died soon after, leaving only the 6 Jedi. Before long, Grievous began hunting the Jedi too. He spooked Giorgi into leaving cover and getting himself killed before attacking the remaining 5. In short order, he cut down Kakruk, Tarsier, Aayla Secura, and Shakti. Kyadimundi was the only one left standing, and he was already exhausted and overwhelmed by Grievous's onslaught. Things were bleak, but Mundi wasn't doomed yet. Barak's distress signal had been received, and Master Kenobi, who was overseeing cleanup operations on recently captured Munilinst, had troops to spare. He dispatched a team of ARC troopers, the Munilinst 10, to rescue the Jedi on Hypori. The Munilinst 10 had played a crucial role in the Battle of Munilinst, and they were already recognized as one of the best ARC teams in the Republic military. The team was led by Alpha 77, better known as Captain Fordo, and it originally consisted of a pair of ARC lieutenants supported by 7 specially trained regular clones. They were afforded high-end equipment and a special, modified LAAT gunship, one that was not only sealable for operations in space, but was apparently also hyperspace capable. But what made the Munilinst 10 truly stand out was their effectiveness. They worked with perfect coordination, communicating solely via quick hand gestures. On Munilinst, they had been deployed to neutralize a major artillery battery at the base of the IGBC headquarters in Haneden, the planet's capital city. Along the way, they battled snipers, an armored assault tank, and scores of battle droids. Despite it all, they successfully blew up the cannon, suffering only a single casualty along the way. After the success of their initial mission, they camped out atop the IGBC headquarters, awaiting further orders from General Kenobi. When Kenobi felt the time was right, he joined Fordo and his men and stormed the IGBC command center, capturing the banking clan's leaders and bringing a swift end to the battle. After the capture of the command center, the Munilinst 10 participated in cleanup operations, mopping up the remnants of the IGBC droid army. But the ordinary troops and the Jedi were more than sufficient to handle that task, so they were promptly redeployed to Hypori. Despite the fact that Munilinst and Hypori were on literal opposite ends of the galaxy, Kenobi felt it best to send in the Munilinst 10 instead of relaying Barak's distress signal to someone who was closer, for reasons unknown. The team of ARC troopers dispatched to Hypori was not the same team Fordo had led on Munilinst, however. The ordinary clones in the Munilinst 10 were left behind, and Fordo instead led a team of 20 ARC lieutenants to Hypori. It's unknown if these were all actual ARC lieutenants or regs in ARC gear. If the former, Fordo's team would have contained a full fifth of all the Alpha class ARC troopers in existence. Many of these new ARCs were heavy weapons specialists wielding Z6 rotary cannons or reciprocating quad blasters. They were ready for just about everything, but they were still only clones, none of whom had ever survived an encounter with General Grievous. The Munilance 10 arrived on Hypori to find Grievous's army gathered around one of the crashed assault ships, combat ready but idle. Grievous and the Jedi were determined to be inside, and Fordo ordered the pilot of the team's gunship to make for the assault ship at full speed. As they went, the gunship distributed small grenades across the battlefield. Grievous's droids opened fire on the gunship, but the Munilance 10's pilot was able to evade all incoming fire and make it under the cover of the wreckage. Once inside, the gunship flew in close to where the surviving Jedi's life signs were detected. The ARC troopers disembarked and picked up vitals from 3 of them, one in a pile of rubble, another in the rafters, and another ahead, engaged in combat against General Grievous. Fordo dispatched 1 trooper each to recover the first 2 Jedi, Shakti and Aayla Secura, both of whom were alive but severely wounded. Kashyyyk, it later turned out, was also still alive, but he was in a deep healing trance that prevented the Munilance 10 scanners from picking up his vitals. Fordo and the rest of the team headed toward Mundi and Grievous. Fordo ordered his men to split into 3 groups, with 2 moving to flank the combatants and the 3rd charging straight in. They caught up to the combatants just in time for Grievous to disarm Mundi. Fordo promptly ordered his men to open fire on Grievous, forcing the general to retreat and saving Mundi's life. The Munilance 10 opened up on Grievous with everything they had, but the droid general was faster than they were, and none of the clones were able to land any hits. Grievous then went on the offensive, killing 4 of Fordo's men, prompting the captain to call in the Munilance 10 gunship for backup. The gunship promptly arrived and unleashed a hail of laser cannon blasts and rockets, forcing Grievous to flee. This bought the Munilance 10 enough time to gather up the Jedi and withdraw over the objections of Mundi. With all the known Jedi survivors recovered, Fordo ordered a retreat, leaving Grievous and the Confederacy victorious on Hypori. As the Munilance 10 made their escape, Fordo detonated the grenades that had been deployed earlier, destroying large chunks of Grievous's army. This didn't deal any lasting damage, but it distracted the droids long enough for the Munilance 10 to successfully escape Hypori. They and the surviving Jedi returned to Republic space with grim stories about the Confederacy's new droid general. Following this, Grievous became the public face of the droid army, the new CIS Supreme Commander, and he would go on to change the Confederacy's whole approach to the Clone Wars. The Munilance 10 and the Jedi they rescued were the first to survive an encounter with Grievous, but their escape only ushered in a new, darker chapter of the war.
Now, I'm not usually one to over-exaggerate, but during my time as a Star Wars YouTuber, I'm yet to read of a battle as chaotic and crazy as the one I'm about to tell you. Shown to us through the rare Star Wars The Clone Wars webcomic titled Act on Instinct, we meet a young Jedi Padawan named Tyson Zebek and a clone commander called Ganch, whose Jedi General, prior to the main events of the story, had been assassinated by the infamous Cad Bane. Following this series of unfortunate events, Mace Windu assigns both Zebek and the seasoned commander Ganch to a new and more disciplined Jedi General named Qiilura in an attempt to rein in the now turbulent young Padawan. With that said, following him being sent to the planet where he nearly died at the hands of his crazed clone commander, Zebek ultimately humbled himself for the rest of the war. The planet of Mygeeto was a critical Republic agricultural world that essentially provided rations to and fed the entire clone army. The planet was, as a result of this, heavily protected and routinely inspected by the Republic in order to ensure that this vital system could not and would not be lost to the Separatist army. With that said, after the Republic commissioned a team consisting of Kit Fisto, Tarzan Zebek, Qiilura, and a contingent of clones including Commander Ganch to inspect the planetary shielding system, things did not go as expected. The Separatists had inadvertently coordinated an extremely unorthodox attack on the world of Mygeeto at the same time of the routine Republic inspection. The Separatists nicknamed their operation Project Extinction, and through the leadership of a modified tactical droid known as the Doctor, they plan to disrupt the Yukian harvest through a series of events that would inevitably result in the CIS controlling the planet. Although the plan seemed foolproof, what the Doctor wasn't expecting was the arrival of the Jedi. Nonetheless, he decided to stick to his plan and see if he could kill some Republic dogs in the process. The Doctor, knowing that conventional strategy simply wouldn't work against the heavily guarded planet of Yukio, engineered a strange and never before seen satellite-like device that began to affect all sentient beings in range, aside from Jedi, by making them act deranged and erratic. When the Jedi started noticing these strange behaviors displayed by the native Yukian as well as their animals, they naturally sent the clones to check it out. The clones, however, also became victim to the strange device, and began turning on each other whilst at the same time trying to fight off the urge to kill. After the young Padawan, Zebek, realizes this and sees his commander about to shoot another clone called Squawk, he intervenes and slices through Ganch's pistol. This enrages Ganch, who is of course still under the influence of the Separatist mind-altering device, leading the usually measured clone commander to assault Zebek with the intention of killing him. After pinning the Padawan down, Zebek manages to inspire doubt into Ganch's mind by telling him that he was not himself and that it was his duty as a soldier to stand down. This seemingly did the trick, and Commander Ganch came back to reality for just a moment before knocking himself out with a med shot to stop the chaos. A now wounded and shaken Zebek gets up and moves the unconscious Commander Ganch to a safer position before embarking on a mission to destroy the Separatist devices he now knew to be the cause of the planet-wide chaos. After managing to destroy 3 out of 3 of the transmitters, Zebek is shortly after shot and injured by the tactical droid previously stated, called the Doctor. As the droid approaches Zebek, ready to land the final blow and end him, it is stopped in its tracks by Zebek's master, Keelivine Roos, and decapitated. After finding out the effects of the transmitter were only temporary, all clones and native Yukians eventually returned to their normal states. It was too late for the planet, however, and although the Separatists hadn't actually directly succeeded in annexing the world, due to the crisis, Yukio's stock prices plummeted, which led to the Separatist influence Commerce Guild to buy up the stocks and essentially have economic control over Yukio. Fun fact, this battle had one of the only instances wherein a clone directly attacked the Jedi before Order 66. So what do you guys think of this chaotic battle? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to join the wider intergalactic community and hop onto our website, Discord, and Instagram for all the latest memes and behind the scenes shots. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.